Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin, Schall, Alex Wolfe for a midseason 2 games past, but who's counting? Check in on the New York Knicks, some statistical markers they've hit, some big questions to come, including where they're at on the championship contention totem pole. All that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, and we are answering some big questions halfway through the year. But before we do that, I have to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because we're now available on every single platform. If you want to see our smiling faces every day, be sure to subscribe on YouTube and hit that notifications bell so you never miss an episode. But if you're questioning the fit of our hat, or you just don't like the way we look, you can check us out on your podcast platform of choice. Just hit that auto download function to ensure you never miss an episode. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin, Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. I almost forgot who I am, Alex. That's not good. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check out all their work on all forms of social media at thestrick.land. We are doing a little mini mid-season breakdown. So I'm going to start off just firing off some stats. The Knicks overall in the season, 10th in offensive rating, 7th in defensive rating. More than halfway through the year, the Knicks, one of 5 teams in the NBA, top 10 in offensive and defensive rating, along with the Celtics, the Pelicans, the Thunder, the Sixers. But the more important version of these stats, Alex, I think, are post-trade, because obviously they're more representative of who the Knicks are and who they're going to be going forward. Offensive rating 13th, defensive rating 1st. So that was a big lead a little while ago. Now the Cavs are shockingly, without Evan Mobley, closing in on that first place marker in terms of net rating. They're 2nd in the NBA, plus 12.9 per 100 possessions. Again, just behind the Cavs over their last 12 games. The OG Anunoby net rating check is still at an absurd 39.6. Yes, that is the best in the NBA since he's become a New York Knick. Their offensive rebounding percentage is 1st in the NBA. Their defensive rebounding percentage is 2nd in the NBA. Their turnover percentage is 30th or last in the NBA. The Knicks have played the 24th hardest schedule in basketball, and they have the 15th hardest schedule remaining. So why do I say all that? Well, those metrics paint the picture of a team that is, if not a true blue title contender, I would say a dark horse title contender. So Alex, we can go a little deeper on this and maybe say how legitimate that is and like what teams they still rank behind and whether one move would actually push them into realistically being in that conversation. But can we start off with the simple fact that I think has to be acknowledged that I would say, or, I'll just frame it as a question. Are the Knicks closer to winning a championship today than they were before the trade?
I would say, yeah. And, ironically, like when you look at those markers and whatever, the Knicks actually are very similar in some ways to the Cavs last year in terms of just how high they're ranking in the offensive and defensive rating right now, and how favorable they look, especially post-trade. That said, I think that the difference there, it mostly comes down to Jalen Brunson. I mean, like the issue with the Cavs obviously was that they got exposed by the Knicks once the playoffs hit last year. They weren't big enough. They weren't tough enough. It's just they weren't built for playoff basketball. They were built for fast-paced, like regular season ball. They played that very well, but then when it came down to it and things tightened up in the postseason, Donovan Mitchell didn't play as well. Evan Mobley certainly didn't play as well and got really bodied by the Knicks bigs. Jared Allen also had big problems. So like the Knicks don't have those problems staring them in the face if they hit the postseason again. And yet they're still putting together these crazy numbers, mostly thanks to the huge defensive versatility that Anunoby has given them now. I mean, I think that I'm still gonna. I mean, this is the thing for me that I feel most smart about this year. When we saw that early season Raptors game, and I was like, I made a point at the end of our show to be like, I see the vision with this. I think Anunoby maybe is the right choice for this team. Like just what he does fits so well with that starting unit of like just being a like god tier corner shooter, especially from his favorite corner, that like right corner. He just never misses from there, which is super useful when you have Brunson and Randall on offense. But then on defense, just the fact that he can switch to pretty much any player on the floor, which the Knicks don't love to play switch heavy at all. But the reality is you have to do it sometimes. Like, you have to switch. It's just part of the game. And, you know, they'll resist it as much as they humanly can. But, you know, at the end of the day, he's going to end up on a center sometimes. He's going to end up on a point guard sometimes. And it never matters. He can gobble up anybody on defense. And we really saw that in the Nets game, the most recent game before we're recording the show, where, you know, he was able to just completely blow up multiple possessions just by being long, athletic, talented on defense, like everywhere all at once, you know, able to switch from one gear to another so quickly of like, oh, I'm defending inside. I'm kind of shading towards the inside. Oh, now I'm going to pop outside and block someone's 3-pointer in the corner. Or, oh, I'm trailing this play and I'm going a million miles an hour in transition, but you know, Precious and Josh Hart just got a block on this dude. Now someone else is going up for it. I've got it in me to just completely switch gears, readjust, and get there to block their shot too. You know, off that offensive rebound and set up one of the best possessions of the Knicks season so far. That game sealing dunk from Julius Randle. So it's all those little things, and I think that's what's leading to that huge disparity in net rating for him. I think it also helps his case a bit that the bench is kind of weakened still at the moment. So the starters have become the overwhelming strength for the Knicks. Whereas before, you know, in past seasons, even last season, you know, that chasm wasn't quite as big between the starters and the bench because the bench was just really, really talented. And there were some games where the bench would straight up win the Knicks the game. That's not really happening as much now. Now the bench is definitely there just to supplement the starters who are playing big minutes and playing really well in them. So I still think as far as title contention, the Knicks are a bit away from it, but they're closer than ever. They really are. I do think that there is a chance that if they add the right piece at the deadline this year and a couple things break their way in the playoffs, like, you know, it's unfortunate, but injuries happen and sometimes they completely shape the course of an NBA season and NBA playoffs. Someone on the Celtics, you know, gets hurt, or someone on, you know, the Sixers gets hurt, or someone on the Bucks gets hurt, or Doc Rivers just tanks the Bucks at this point because he doesn't exactly have the greatest track record. They could find themselves in a position to like legitimately contend this year.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is that OG is a skeleton key to unlocking whatever their next big move is, because he's one of the most malleable players in basketball, and there isn't a superstar in the league that he's not quite literally an ideal fit next to. And I think they now have two spots, like in whatever the best version of the Knicks looks like over the next few years. It's going to feature Jalen Brunson, and barring something disastrous in free agency, it's going to feature OG Anunoby. I do think it's important when answering this question to look back on what happened in last year's playoffs, where the Knicks offense that was third best in the NBA, like, completely fell apart, and they ended up being the second worst offense in the playoffs. And their defense that was pretty mediocre performed like the best defense in basketball, or right next to the Miami Heat as the best defense in all of basketball. And part of that was due to matchups and playing first a great defensive team in the Cavs and then a great defensive coach in Eric Spoelstra. But I thought it was also telling. And I think if I have a lingering concern heading into the postseason, is the same thing going to happen to the offense again? And of course, since the trade, the Knicks were something like 7th or 8th in offensive rating before the trade went down, and they've fallen to 13th since the trade. And I do think that's not a fluke. I think that's representative, and I have significant concerns that we're going to get to the postseason and it's going to be like, all right, Jalen, you have to do everything, and you have to put up close to 40 if we're going to beat the Miami Heat, if we are going to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers again. And we'll see if that ultimately becomes reality. And I guess what I'm really asking is, like, can Julius Randle, for the first time in his career, translate his regular season play to the playoffs? Because if he does, those concerns are alleviated. If the Knicks, which we'll get into in a sec, if they trade for a Malcolm Brogdon type guy, those concerns are alleviated a little bit. But if the offense becomes 4 guys basically watching Jalen Brunson and an entire defense with a great coaching staff and great athletes focused in on him, I think long-term, the Knicks will still be better set up for a championship. But I think it's plausible that this season reveals, despite the incredible success this team has had post-trade, that they're not quite ready to win big in the playoffs yet, even if the defense is totally dominant, which I don't think we've seen any reason to expect that it won't be in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is whether you think that this is going to be what this team is going to be going towards the playoffs or not. And I don't think so. I think I feel more certain than any other season with the Knicks. Like usually the Knicks would make some small move, like, or well, I guess that's not necessarily true. Under the with Leon Rose, like they did the Reddish deal, which was pretty small a couple years ago, but then obviously traded for Josh Hart last year, which was pretty big, which was like a mini version of trading for Anunoby this year.
Yeah, and Derrick Rose before that.
And Derrick Rose before that. Yeah. So they usually just kind of make their one move. And then we spend the whole rest of the time being like, oh, what if another move is coming? And they usually make that one move fairly early by comparison to everybody else in the league. This year they kicked off trade season. Like they were like the first major deal of the season, trading for OG. And last year with Josh Hart, they were early on in the process. They were fairly early on Rose as well, probably just because the cost was so little. And they were fairly early on Reddish too. It was like early January that year when they traded for him. So it's sort of a consistent theme with them to kind of make that one move and then say, okay, we're done. And then we just spend the rest of the time kind of being like, well, maybe they'll trade for someone else. There's certainly stuff to do it if they want to. And then we see the trade deadline come and go and they don't trade for anyone. I would be massively surprised if that was the case this year. Like, I don't think that they look at this team and say, okay, yeah, I think we're good to go. Like, let's head towards the postseason this way. We'll figure the rest out later, whatever. That could wait till the offseason. I think the front office feels a little more sense of urgency this year of like, no, okay, this team is like really, really good. They need just a little more help. Like I know that Malcolm Brogdon isn't like a world beater or anything, but if you add a Malcolm Brogdon to this team and can just have that creation off the bench and his scoring and another guy that can like dribble the ball, can, score for himself, from a standstill and do it well. And also has good vision. He's a really good passer and, can play backup point guard or off ball with Jalen Brunson. Like you essentially just kind of replace Emmanuel quickly with an older, slightly different player, but a guy that on offense at least can do many of the same things. And if you essentially have the team with a quickly type impact at that backup point guard spot who could potentially close games for you and stuff, and then you also have OG Anunoby, who's been the difference maker that he's been, I think that's what makes the Knicks potentially like a dark horse team this year. As they're constructed right now, I'm with you. I think they would fall apart a bit in the postseason. Maybe not in the first round. Like they might get to the second round again, just off of how crazy gritty they are and the fact that, I think they just play a really good postseason style of basketball where it's more grinded out regardless. But then again, once you hit that second round and it's like all the better teams with more talent and, more ability to potentially stop Jalen Brunson from being like the alpha and the omega, then that's where you run into some issues, I think.
Yeah, to me, it's not even about stopping Jalen. It's the fact that, what we saw happen last year where everyone not named Jalen Brunson just sucked on offense. Like, was there one other guy who you would say had a good offensive series? Like, I can't think of him. And again, and so much of that is on Julius Randle's shoulders, and maybe that changes if there's a move. Will there be a move? We'll get into that next. But first, I have to tell you about our buddies over at Grammarly. When it comes to writing, Grammarly is there to support you from start to finish. For over 10 years, Grammarly has been powered by AI technology you can trust to help you across all the places where you write the most. And now Grammarly helps you do even more. With one click, you can easily brainstorm, rewrite, and reply with suggestions based on your context and goals so you can improve productivity for you and your teams. Alex, I am super excited to use Grammarly to help us with writing podcast rundowns, to help us come up with the best thumbnail so you guys click on our videos and see our smiling faces every day. It is seriously a lifesaver. It has talked me out of some really bad emails over the years. It would have been embarrassing if I sent them out in a professional context with an error that otherwise could have been caught. When you're stuck writing at work, Grammarly can help you get started with ideas, outline, and even tips. Whether you need to polish your writing, Grammarly can help paraphrase and rewrite to be more concise instantly. Big presentation coming up, like Grammarly create a personalized outline to get you organized so you can transform your ideas into a compelling presentation. The best part is that it's free to use. So start being more productive at work. Go to Grammarly.com/podcast to download for free today. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast.
And today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. And what is Prize Picks? Well, it's the best and largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks and whales, and whatever other forms of marine mammals, you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And with basketball season and football season still going on, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's very fun. It's a new way to sort of celebrate a double sports day, because we love those, especially with playoff football and some high leverage midseason basketball right now. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you can pick LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. It's pretty fun. And Prize Picks also offers, this is my favorite feature, a reboot policy, so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. And Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, which is key in any form of fantasy sports. The worst thing that can happen to you is to have a day that has not even started yet get derailed by an injury, or a player having a good first half that's well on their way to their projection, then, getting injured at the end of the first half and not coming back and not being able to fulfill that. Prize Picks makes sure that never happens to you. So if you want to play for yourself, go to prizepicks.com/lockedonnba and use code LockedOnNBA for your first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedonnba and use code LockedOnNBA for your first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, Gavin, we're back in, continuing with some of the big questions for the Knicks here in this second half. We're very slightly over the halfway part of the season, but good time to check in, with an off day here, and the fact that the Knicks are playing as well as they have in the OG era here. I think that we sort of started getting into this, or at least I did right before the break there. But I want to hear your more in-depth thoughts on this. Do you think the Knicks need to be really super duper aggressive about filling that backup point guard spot? And what caliber of player do you think they need to go after, whether it's this year or if it's something that they address in the off season? Is it worth kind of paying a little bit of a premium to get someone at the deadline versus potentially being able to work some form of sign and trade in the off season? Because I don't know if I didn't make, if just in case I didn't make it clear enough in the last segment, I think that could potentially be a move that turns this team into a dark horse title team this year. They still have a lot of things to prove in that case. They would have to translate things to the postseason and then really get out of the first round, and then probably get out of the second round and get to the ECF to say that they really proved something this year. Because obviously they got to the second round last year, put up a good effort against the Heat, and ultimately lost, and had pretty much everyone but Brunson not put forth the best performance last year in that second round series. But I don't know. I think they should be really aggressive with that backup point guard spot, and hopefully you could get a player that's nice and versatile, Brogdon really is just the perfect a glove fit for this team if Portland and the Knicks want to deal again. But we've seen Jordan Clarkson's name come up. Obviously, we've seen DeJounte Murray, who would probably slot in as a starter, but play some backup point from time to time with that second unit. I mean, I think that there is just a really robust market right now. And if I were the Knicks, I would be super aggressive over these next couple of weeks to make sure to address that spot.
Yeah, if they want to win this year, they just have to do it. They are not getting out of the second round, to your point, without making a move. I just don't see any world where these bench lineups are not utterly neutered, even further than they've currently been neutered in the regular season against whether it's the Miami Heat, whether it's the Sixers, whether it's the Celtics, whether it's the Bucks in the second round. They are just not going to score enough. And Deuce McBride, we've seen it. He is absolutely a NBA rotation player. He is not an NBA point guard. They do not have another NBA point guard on the roster outside of Jalen Brunson. And I think the underrated part of this conversation is I don't think they have a fifth guy to close games that is ready for a second round playoff series. Could they beat the Cavs again with Josh Hart out there? Absolutely. We saw it. He was incredible against the Cavs. He was probably their third most valuable player in that series, made some fantastic shots, changed the complexion of every single game he came into, every time he came in, he was wonderful. And then he was an utter detriment against the Miami Heat. And if the Knicks go into the playoffs with the same rotation, they're asking for history to repeat itself. And I can tell you this, Alex, barring a heater that is just beyond my expectations from Hart and a willingness to put up a whole bunch of threes and making a bunch of them, there's no way it's going to be any better this time around. So I think it's partially those backup minutes, and I think it's partially who is going to close games. I saw someone in our comments, and I'm sorry I didn't get back to you, suggest that Dante DiVincenzo can be that person. He absolutely can, and honestly, nothing changes. I hope it's DiVincenzo or Grimes. That would be nice as well, finishing up games in the postseason. But neither of them give you what Malcolm Brogdon gives you, which is that extra bit of creation, ability to break down guys off the dribble, to get a defense in rotation, and a third player on the court who can get OG Anunoby easy shots. And if Julius Randle falls apart for the third straight postseason, we've only ever seen Julius Randle fall apart in the postseason. You need someone other than Brunson. That breaking case of emergency guy last year was Quickly, and when he faltered, it was RJ, and RJ did just enough. You have neither of those guys this time. If anything happens with Randle, again, you are completely screwed if someone like Malcolm Brogdon is not on the roster. So it just depends how much the Knicks care about this season. I think Brogdon, like you, could be completely transformative. One of the best catch-and-shoot three-point shooters in the NBA. Basically combines the best attributes of everyone the Knicks have to play those spots right now, with the exception of Grimes' on-the-ball defense. To your point, perfect fit. And if the Knicks don't do it, that's fine. Like, they can hold on to their assets. It just means they're not serious about doing anything more this season than they did last year.
Yeah, and I think it's going to require a bit of a like getting rid of the hesitancy that they have right now to hold those picks that they have. Like, I think that there's a real value in turning one of those into Brogdon if you can. Like, if that's ultimately what the price comes down as, which I think there are only so many buyers on the market this year. And like, I actually think that for once it's almost equal, buyers versus sellers, like the teams that are looking to move their guys in the category that the Knicks want versus teams that are actively looking to like buy and try to elevate their team, like by the trade deadline this year. So I think that there's like something to be said for going for a Malcolm Brogdon, using another first round pick. And obviously, I mean, I say they've shown reluctance to do that, but they did do it for Josh Hart last year. And that move proved to be great. I mean, I guess we'll see how it was Chris Murray that got drafted by Portland with that pick, I think. So I guess we'll see how his career turns out. But as of right now, I think that was well worth it for the Knicks, you know, given the talent level in the draft and whatever. This year, again, is, you know, it's supposed to be kind of a deep draft, but you know, I trust the Knicks staff to figure out the right guys to draft. But, you know, if they get the opportunity to trade one of their 2 first-round picks this year, we've seen their reluctance to draft guys anyway. So may as well just trade one of the 2 picks. You got to get some guys on rookie contracts back on this team. So I don't want them to trade both those picks this year. But, you know, if you get that opportunity to get Brogdon, I think it makes too much sense to not do it. But even if you don't get him, just go bargain hunting after that. I mean, Rozier just got moved, which is unfortunate because he would have been a really good fit too. But, you know, go after Clarkson. Like, if Utah reaches a point where, which granted, Utah will have no urgency because Clarkson still has a couple years left on his deal and actually gets paid less going forward than he's getting paid right now. So he's a value contract. They're sort of on the rise. Like, they're playing a lot better as the season has gone on, and they're like barely under 500, fighting towards the play-in right now. So, you know, maybe things have changed a little bit there with their outlook on trading guys. But yeah, I think they need to go for that because they have a chance to maybe catch lightning in a bottle this year, but they're not going to do it unless they make that move.
Yeah, I'm with you. I want to get into how the Knicks have performed against good teams post-trade. They've done really well, but they haven't had that much of an opportunity. Will it continue to translate the rest of this regular season? And some more thoughts on big moves and something you just hinted at. Are the Knicks not stockpiling enough youth for a championship run going forward? All that next on Locked On Knicks. But first, before we get into that, Alex, do you want to tell everyone at home about our friends over at Hungry Root?
Why, yes, of course, because, you know, the Knicks might be hungry for success, but you might just be hungry for some food, in which case you should check out Hungry Root. Hungry Root is the easiest way to get fresh, high-quality food delivered to your door. They've got healthy groceries and simple recipes all in one place. And you, who doesn't love doing this? You take a fun, short quiz, and Hungry Root will get to know you, your goals, and how you like to eat. They'll ask what flavors you like, which kitchen appliances you use, and more. And then they'll keep your needs and preferences top of mind and start building your cart with delicious recipes and all your grocery needs for the week. Hungry Root will recommend recipes and groceries based on your tastes. You can take their suggestions or choose anything you want. They've got fresh produce, high quality meat and seafood, pantry staples, healthy snacks and sweets, and much more. And yeah, I mean, who doesn't love having a personally catered list of things for them that are all relatively good for you and make you feel good, because good food makes you feel good. I love eating. It's one of my favorite things. Hungry Root goes beyond just your weekly grocery haul with thousands of easy recipes that actually put your groceries to good use too before they get forgotten in the back of your fridge. I'm definitely a perpetrator of that, unfortunately. The best part is Hungry Root follows a simple standard. It's got to taste good or be quick to make and contain whole trusted ingredients. So spend less time meal planning, shopping, and cooking, and more time enjoying healthy food that you'll actually love with Hungry Root. Right now, Hungry Root is offering Locked On NBA listeners 40% off your first delivery and free veggies for life. Free veggies for life. Ooh, that's cool. Just go to hungryroot.com/locked-on and you'll get 40% off your first delivery and get your free veggies. Do that for the New Year's resolution still going on, hopefully. That's hungryroot.com/locked-on. Don't forget to use our link so they know we sent you. All right, Gavin, we're back in to keep talking about this Knicks mid-season report that we're going through here. And you wrote a good question in our prep doc here. Are the Knicks putting too much of a creation burden on Jalen Brunson? And I think this is I guess this sort of goes to what we were just talking about with the trade, but even beyond that, even if they would make a trade for another creator, I don't doubt that they would still have Brunson doing most of the creation going down the stretch. I think my counterpoint to this, and I do think that in some ways, yes, they do put too much burden on him. I will say, before I throw it to you for your thoughts on this, I think the one thing that is really encouraging about Brunson's role lately, or maybe just Brunson's approach lately, is that he seems to have a really innate understanding of when he's got it going and when he doesn't any given night. And we've seen a lot more nights recently where he's used his creation ability to not just be like, oh, I have to be the guy that's going to score for this team, but be like, okay, the shot's not really falling for me today, so I'm going to take advantage of the defensive attention that I get and just kick it to open shooters all day, or work with Julius in more of a two-man game and get him cutting to the hoop and hit him off like a pick and roll or something a little different like that. So they are throwing some varied looks out there that make it so that it's not on Brunson to score 30 points a night every single night, even if he's been doing it lately. That said, the worrying part about that to me is that if we run into a situation like the Heat series last year where nobody else can make a shot, if Brunson has an off night and if the creation burden and the scoring burden is too much on him, they are definitely set up for some problems, unfortunately, in the postseason. And I'm not quite sure how to fix that.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to overdo it on this point because we've talked about it a lot already. To me, this was I was almost thinking about it from the perspective when I wrote it in there, like is he going to fatigue? Like, is he going to falter down the stretch of the season? I was kind of pleasantly surprised to see when I looked it up. He's 15th out of guys who play at least 25 minutes a game in the NBA since the trade in terms of his usage rate. And Julius Randle is actually 2 spots ahead of him. And part of it is maybe just their physical size and the type of hits they take because of their size, but it's a credit to Randle that that's almost not a question in my mind. Like, I'm not even slightly concerned about it with him. And it's just a testament to what a freaking bull the guy is. But with Brunson, yeah, I think it's just obvious that the Knicks are probably too reliant on him. And I guess what I'm trying to gauge in my head, is that disproportionate compared to the best players on the other best teams in the NBA? And is that just a thing where all right, I'm not used to mentioning Brunson in the same sentence as a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, as a Luka Doncic, as a Joel Embiid, as a Nikola Jokic. And of course he's a notch below those guys, but he's playing a similar role on the Knicks, if not quite the same level of just him being the sun, the moon, and the stars for the team. But it feels like post-trade he almost is with Emmanuel quickly off. So that is something to see down the road. Maybe my biggest question I had left, Alex, and then if there's one more you want to hit, we can hit it before wrapping up. It was if their post-trade dominance will translate against the best teams in the league. And of course, we already addressed like how we think that'll work in the playoffs, but how will it work the rest of the regular season? Because we have to say all the evidence we have right now is that they're pretty darn good against the best teams in the league. They've only had 2 real opportunities, but they beat Minnesota and they were dominant for about 3/4 of that game before the Timberwolves like came back from, I think it was like 22 points down and got the lead down to like 4 or 5. And Julius Randle was just incredible down the stretch of that game to ensure they didn't ultimately come back and beat the Knicks. And then the Sixers game was a little bit of a weirder one to like gauge long-term reaction that Joel Embiid got hurt in the first few minutes, gutted it out to still have 30 and 10, but certainly didn't have the impact you feel like he's been having in some of these other games. Certainly not a 70-point night for him. And Tobias Harris was apparently hurt in that game and didn't play the second half. On the flip side, Julius Randle absolutely sucked in that game. It was about as bad as any game he's played since the first few of the season. And the Knicks won by like 25 or 30. So how can you not say that that was a great performance? To me, the biggest thing is just holding up still when Brunson is off the floor. And I'm wondering, like, we'll get to see it tonight against the Nuggets and then this weekend against the Heat. And then a little bit more after All-Star break when the schedule picks up again. I noted the Knicks have a harder schedule the rest of the year than they do the early parts of the year. And that's significant because as we cited last night with the Jazz win, the Knicks are now 19-1 against teams over 500, which means I'm going to have to do some quick math here because I forgot the number. They're just 8-16 against teams under 500. The good news is there's something like 3-1 since the trade. So before the trade, they were disastrous against those teams. Since the trade, they've been good. And I think that will generally hold up. And if they can play close to 500 ball against those teams, they're so good about taking care of business. They're very likely to get a top 4 seed barring some substantial injury.
Yeah, I think you flip-flopped those when you were just saying it. So they're really good against the under 500 teams, 19-1.
Yeah.
Yes. And then have had less success against the over 500 teams. But post-trade, I think the biggest thing is that now they have a stopper. That's just what OG is. I mean, we've seen it play out time and time again. He makes guys uncomfortable. Like we saw it in that Timberwolves game. He made Anthony Edwards uncomfortable. We've seen him basically every match. And, you know, I'm really intrigued to see how this is going to work against Jimmy Butler, because Butler has always had a field day against the Knicks ever since he signed with the Heat. Like every single time they play, except for obviously last year, the iconic like possession against Quentin Grimes where Grimes shut him down and all that for the Knicks to win that game. Like he's always had really, really, really good games against the Knicks ever since he came over to Miami, I should say. So having OG out there and having him be able to check Butler will be huge. Having him be able to check the Tatums of the world will be huge. Having him be able to check, you know, anyone that is a really good player on another team, maybe not like Joel Embiid because he just plays in a different player category. But
Anunoby did a pretty good job guarding Embiid when he got a chance.
When he had to, he did. You're not going to keep him as the primary defender, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
But the other X factor there is Hartenstein and how well he's been playing. I mean, he's played good defense against the best centers that have been thrown at him, and it's just been such a dominant force and looked like, I mean, when he's been at his best lately, he looks like a top 10 center in the league himself. You know, he's played fantastic over the last month.
I saw a stat, Alex, in EPM this year, he's like 25th in the NBA or something. I'm gonna double check that to make sure, but he's been incredible.
Very familiar stat placement considering the guy that has moved in for, which Mitch has always placed really high in those sort of metrics as well.
Yeah.
As far as his impact, thanks to all the offensive rebounding and the defensive presence and everything else. So the fact that the Knicks can have both those guys plus an Anunoby, that's the thing that gives me the most hope that they're going to be able to handle these really, really good teams in the league. Because now you could say two things are going to be true in any given game as long as the Knicks reach their full health at some point. And that is Anunoby can guard the best wing player or even a guard on the other team that they have and make their life hell for a full, could basically, we've seen Tibbs do this. He'll shadow a player against another player if he feels like it's beneficial. So OG Anunoby might match like Donovan Mitchell's minutes in the playoffs or, Jimmy Butler's minutes in the playoffs or whoever the Knicks end up facing. And then the other thing is that if you end up with Mitch and Hartenstein both healthy come playoff time, or even just Hartenstein for the rest of the regular season, hopefully he comes back soon and is healthy and everything, then you have that dominant defensive presence on the inside too, and still that dominant rebounding that got the Knicks so far last year and sort of revolutionized how basketball is being played again in the NBA with a pretty heavy emphasis on going after offensive rebounds and getting those second chance points. I think the Knicks are really well set up to compete against the best teams in the league. And with Brunson playing as well as he has, I think that's all you need right now. And so as long as he can keep things up, and then obviously, like you said, Randall is the big X factor. They've proven that they can play well enough without Randall playing well to still win games. But when those two are going together, when they're both on, the Knicks are borderline unstoppable sometimes, especially when they're at full strength at all their other positions too. So I feel good about their ability to play a lot better against those above 500 teams the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, we said it all the time on the pod earlier this year. They were just physically small in a way that you could feel watching at home. And as a fan, it was a helpless feeling because there was just this sense of inevitability. Like every time we played the Celtics this year, like coming off a year where we beat them, they came out and upgraded. And it just felt even like night one, I guess, was the exception. And quickly, if I'm remembering correctly, was so good in that game and made a big difference. But in general, like they just felt too big. The Pelicans early in the year just felt too big. I thought the Sixers were going to be too big. I thought the Nuggets were going to be too big. And now it just feels like at least physically, the Knicks can match up. Whether they have enough, like that comes down to just how amazing Jalen Brunson can be on any given night. Can Dante DiVincenzo have a game where he gives you 5 or 6 threes? But at least like it's a possibility now where they were just going to get bulldozed in the past. Alex, we can just spend a minute on this, but you mentioned them trading now their last 2 first-round picks, because even the year before they traded the one for Hart, they traded the one nominally to create extra room to sign Brunson. They've also traded RJ Barrett. They've traded Emmanuel Quickly. They traded Obi Toppin. They're apparently looking at trading Quentin Grimes. Are the Knicks getting, I don't even want to say too old because like they have all these guys in the prime of their career, but is there a misallocation of contracts perhaps that could come back to hurt them when they do have this star-loaded team and all of a sudden they don't have relatively cheap labor to ensure that they can keep winning long-term?
Yeah, I guess we'll see. I mean, I have a pretty concise answer to this, which is just they need to remedy the situation by using some of their draft picks sometime soon and just getting a few first-round guys on the books. They can even draft more developmental guys if they want to, because obviously they're not going to play for a little bit. They're becoming a veteran-laden team, so you can kind of take some shots in the dark and do sort of like what the Warriors did for a number of years, where they drafted guys that they were like, oh, I don't know if he's necessarily going to play this year or even next year, but like Kevon Looney, for example, like didn't really play at all for his first couple of years in the league, and then came on huge for them later on and paid big dividends. So
Jordan Poole, even if that's a curse name, was a G leaguer and turned into an essential finals guy for them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it happened with multiple guys for them. So that would be my strategy. If I were Leon Rose and Perrin and all them, and they have plenty of draft capital over the next couple of years to pull that off, depending on how some of these, like, just even if the Washington and Detroit picks never convey, they could potentially have at their disposal 4 first-round picks over the next 2 drafts, because they have theirs in Dallas's this year, and then that Milwaukee one is pretty much guaranteed to convey to them next year, as well as their own pick, which they still own. So my advice to them would just be use those picks, draft players, get some rookies on deals, and just keep doing that. But I don't think they've shot themselves in the foot too much or anything. They're obviously still going to be great this year and beyond, because they have a lot of these guys locked up, but they're going to get expensive soon too, which is annoying. And so those draft picks, they're going to need to like keep enough of those with the team after whatever big trade they make to refill the roster a little bit, because that is going to be something that could bite them once they're a tax-paying team and things get way more restrictive on how they can kind of finagle the cap with trades and signings and stuff like that to keep filling out the roster year over year.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. With that, we'll wrap up this edition of the Locked On Knicks podcast. Those are some big questions for the second half of the season. The one you're asking yourself today, can Precious Achiuwa stop Nikola Jokic? I think I know the answer, but we'll find out for sure tonight. And if you want to find out with us, you can tune in to our post-game show. But until then, he's Alex and Gavin. We'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.